few days would pass as Deku would now be diving into a cave in the ruins of Batman's old Batcave in Japan, where he stored the most powerful Batsuit, the Beyond Suit. There's so much tech in here. Are you sure you don't need any of this stuff? Deku would ask over his comms. We don't need it. I built just about everything that Batman has ever used, Izuku. Powers would say. Then what makes this suit so different? Deku would ask while digging through the rubble. Wayne built this suit all by himself, and it's the most powerful suit he's ever made, although he never wore it himself. Now shut up and find that suit. Powers would reply. Deku would find the suit, however the JTO would raise the alarm after finding the cable Deku used. They know I'm here, Deku would say while putting the suit on. Good. Put the suit on. This will be the perfect field test, and don't worry, I'll help you out by hacking into the suit's CPU, Powers would say. The guards would surround Deku as they shined the light on him. They'd be surprised, radioing in, It's Batman, we're gonna need... The radio is cut short as Deku grabs the guard's arm and ends up breaking it accidentally, along with stabbing into him with the claws. I didn't mean to do that. It's just the claws that came out on their own, Deku would say. Powers would go to inspect the suit while Deku was beating the guards down badly, just as the wings came out uppercutting the last two guards. Before Deku flew out of the cave, Wayne is a genius. Now, Izuku, bring the suit back. We need to run tests before your entrance exams arrive, Powers would say. Deku would have a confused look on his face, asking about what entrance exams. Powers would say that he'll explain everything later. Just know they only have 9 months left, so it's going to be non-stop training. Meanwhile, back in Gotham City, there's a prison riot going on. An officer is being held hostage, the first son of Batman, Jason Todd. The blood of Azrael's gang is holding him captive. Give me your weapon, an old man would say to the guard. The guards would look at the man. Well, you heard him. Give him your weapon. One of the guards would say. Duke, you can't be serious. Why don't you give Wayne your weapon? The other guard asked. Not my turn. Now hurry up, Duke would say. Bruce would be given the weapon as he'd go in and take out several inmates, and after negotiating, he'd get Jason to safety, and the two would have a heart-to-heart. Later that night, Duke would show Bruce the news that a new Batman was in Japan. Bruce would be overcome with emotion. He'd find out that the U.S. had become patrolled by the GTO in every city and state across the country, abolishing the hero agencies, and now the same thing is happening to Japan. And whether he wanted to or not, the world needs Batman to return, now more than ever. Bruce would say, I'm not Batman anymore. The world doesn't need Batman, and it doesn't need a military force of Batman occupying it either. How'd this happen, Duke? Where did I go wrong? You didn't go wrong, Bruce. You may be stubborn and brooding, but you're not crazy, Jason would say, throwing Bruce his keycard. I'll give you 20 minutes before I sound the alarm. Now get going and head to Japan. That's where we need you most, Jason would say, smirking and walking away. Bruce would break out of Stonegate Prison, making his way to one of his last safe houses. However, before that, he'd be visited by what he thought was a ghost of Jack Napier, also known as the Joker. This would cause Bruce to have a small panic attack before composing himself and heading into his bat bunker, until he was confronted by Harley Quinn, his wife. Bruce would explain his situation and how he doesn't want to involve Harley in this, or anybody else for that matter. Harley, however, would help Bruce get out of Gotham and set him up on a ride to Japan. Back in Japan, Deku would be training every day at Wayne Powers, using virtual simulations against Batman's old foes, ranging from Lady Shiva to Killer Croc, Deathstroke, and even Deadshot. They were difficult for him to overcome at first, but the suit helped it increase his speed, strength, and durability. Deku would also hone his stealth skills, learning about the suit's invisibility and small listening devices on his fingertips. Along with that, Deku would be secretly investigating Powers since he didn't fully trust him. And we're going to go ahead and skip to the day before the entrance exams. Derek Powers would call Deku while he was about to have dinner. "It's time I tell you the plan. Are you alone?" Powers would ask. "Yeah, I'm alone. And you sure do wait until the last minute for these things. A heads up would definitely be nice, Deku will reply in an annoyed tone. "That's not important. What is important, however, is your entrance exam at a UA college. You'll be taking it tomorrow. You have to be accepted no matter what. Failure isn't an option. I'll tell you the rest when it's clear if the mission succeeded or not." Powers would tell him. "Yeah, small problem. I'm quirkless, so how am I supposed to get past that hurdle?" Deku would say. "You're Batman. Figure it out," Powers retorted before hanging up. Deku would tell his family that he'd be taking the entrance exams for UA. They'd be surprised, and Namasa would curiously ask if Powers is having him do it, and Deku would just shake his head, and Namasa would tell Deku to be careful and then leave it at that. The next day, Deku would suit up in the Beyond suit, however, he'd put some gym clothes over top of it. Deku would also get there a lot faster since he wanted to be there early, meaning that he wouldn't meet Uraka. The written exam would be easy for him, however, he didn't really want to draw attention to himself, so he waited till half the class turned in their papers and then headed out to the practical exam. While he was there, he'd see somebody familiar. It was Bakugo, and this motivated Deku to show him up even more. Deku would head towards the front, where he would be stopped as someone would grab his shoulder. Deku would grab the person's arm, throwing them to the ground, and would stomp his foot on their chest. "What's your problem?" Deku would ask. The guy would look at Deku with complete shock before saying, "I won't allow you to sabotage that young woman." Deku would be confused as he would look towards seeing a young brown-haired girl, saying, "I wasn't even heading in her direction. I was going to the front corner. So how about you drop this whole white knight act? You're no Jack Napier, and you might want to quit trying to be before it gets you seriously hurt." This would completely embarrass the boy as Deku would begin to walk off towards the gate as it would open. Deku would rush in and begin to tear apart the robots. He'd also make sure to save the other contestants if they were going to get hurt. This would get Aizawa's attention as he'd slowly watch Deku, making sure not to lose track of the boy. "What's this one's quirk?" Aizawa would ask. "Well, according to his file, Izukumi Doria is quirkless," Nezu would say. "He has skill, and even more so he's been trained. I'm sure of it. He's rough around the edges, but he's definitely the Batman. There's no doubt about it," Bruce would say, emerging from the shadows. "Should we move in on him, Mr. Wayne?" Nezu would ask. Bruce would shake his head, saying that they don't know his intentions yet, and that this kid is the key to everything, so they shouldn't act recklessly. They're already at too much of a disadvantage. Nezu would push a button, releasing the 0-pointer, saying, "This is the quickest way to find out if his heart is in the right place or not." Back on the field, the 0-pointer would release, causing everyone to panic. Deku was about to bail until he looked back, seeing a girl who couldn't move. Deku thought back to his father's final words that night. "Make something of yourself." Make something. He immediately ran towards the girl. To everyone's shock, Bruce, seeing this, would smile as he said, "Seal the site. Let's see what this new Batman can do." With everyone else out of the way, the doors would slam shut and an energy field would go up to keep the other students out. Deku wouldn't notice as he threw his other clothes off, fully suiting up in the Beyond suit. However, Powers wouldn't know since all outside communications were being blocked on all frequencies. Deku would fly in, grabbing the girl and throwing an explosive Batarang at the 0-pointer's sensors, destroying it. Once the girl was saved, Deku knew his cover was blown, and that everyone would know. Before he could turn invisible, however, Aizawa would tell him that they won't reveal his secret on one condition. "Oh, and what's that condition?" Deku would ask with his arms crossed. "The condition is for you to meet someone," Nezu would say, popping out of Aizawa's scarf. "A talking rodent just popped out of your scarf. This school can't be normal," Deku would say to Aizawa, who would then say, "This coming from the guy dressed like a flying rodent? Besides, you don't have much of a choice, do you?" Deku would sigh, knowing that they had all the leverage in this situation. The girl would be taken to the exit by the other teachers, as Deku would be taken into the building and put inside of a conference room, where he'd be seated until the room suddenly went pitch black. Deku would see movement and attack, only for himself to be grabbed and thrown to the ground, pinned as if he felt the mask being taken off. "Now get up and try again without your eyes this time," a voice would say. Deku would get up and try to attack, however, he would only hit air. "Lousy, you use the suit as a crutch, and you think to call yourself Batman?" The voice said to Deku, who would attack where the voice was to no success. "You've only trained against computers, which doesn't prepare you for someone who's more skilled than yourself. You're still just an amateur. If you went up against the higher-ranked JTO members, you'd be humiliated." The voice continued. Before Deku could even move, he'd receive several punches and be beaten to the floor, with the last words he heard being, "You're pathetic. Say goodnight." Before being knocked out, Deku would wake up in the school infirmary, however, it'd be without the suit. Before he could move, he'd be thrown some clothes and told to follow. Deku would be taken to the school workshop, where he'd see someone familiar working on his suit. "Oh, you're awake? Well, that's good, and thanks again for saving me all those months ago," the girl said. Deku would look confused. Before he could even ask any questions, two people would make themselves known, those people being All Might and Bruce Wayne. "How are you feeling? I'm sorry I went a little rough on you, but you needed to be made aware of the gap in skill," Bruce would say. "UA is harboring an international criminal?" Deku would ask. "Bruce is no criminal, young man. He's paid for his crime. However, his sentence was continually extended behind the scenes to ensure that he'd never get out," All Might would say. "Alright, that can come later then. What I want to know right now is, what is she doing to my suit?" Deku would ask. "Her name is Melissa Shield. Her father is the owner of Wayne Shield and Island. She was going to be attending as a student in the applied science class. However, once I found out you stole the Beyond suit, a plan needed to be made in case we'd have to stop you," Bruce would say. "Derek Powers and the JTO need to be brought down and face justice for what they've done. And for that, we need Batman," All Might would say. Deku would ask All Might what they've done that's so bad. "They're eating up the country's budget, causing higher tax rates that cause people to turn to theft, increasing the crime rate, suicides up to an all-time high, drug use is through the roof. They vandalize heroes, arresting some that refuse to hand over cases to them, and since they're independent from the normal police and justice system, most of the time they don't even get a trial. And to top it all off, there's no such thing as victims anymore. They're corrupt beyond redemption, and with Commander Todoroki leading them, they've gone too far to be number one in Japan," All Might would say. Deku would say that he agrees the JTO is beyond saving and needs to be taken down. "How does Powers play into things, though?" Deku would ask. Bruce would then explain how the GTO stayed funded after the death of the Joker, being that Powers and Dick Grayson came forward with funding from his company once Bruce was in jail, as Powers bought out all of Wayne's companies except for one, that then led to the creation of a new GTO that the mayor would fund with the city's budget, which after years of cleaning up the supervillain element, expanded all over the US and eventually made its way to Japan. Powers runs the GTO and the JTO. They all answer to him, so if any government doesn't do as he wants, the JTO can easily overthrow that country and turn it into a military occupancy, and secretly establish a new government. Powers is planning to do that with Japan, as he's bringing in supervillains to become undercover JTO officers, to force the country into a state where they have to give him full control, and he's using you for that very same reason, Bruce would tell Deku. "That's crazy. He gave me a clean record and the tools to take revenge on my father's killers, as well as have me continue his work," Deku would say. "If you trust him so much, then why are you investigating him?" Bruce would ask. Deku would be shocked Bruce knew about that. "You can thank me for covering your tracks, 'cause you were sloppy. As for your criminal record, it wasn't erased. It was just taken off the public record. It's still in the JTO database. Powers won't give a full clean slate. He's manipulating you, playing you right out of Jack Napier's handbook, and you'll fail if you don't take our help," Bruce would say, smiling and handing Deku back the Beyond suit. Deku looks at the symbol and back to Bruce. "The suit is yours if you'll help us stop the man who actually killed your father," Bruce would say. "I've turned a blind eye to the truth right under my nose. Some Batman I am," Deku would say. Bruce would tell him that he's in Class 1A in the Hero course, and that his real training starts tomorrow, and wait until the results are mailed to him to tell Powers. Deku would nod and do exactly that. He was gonna play Powers the same way Powers played him. Over the next few months, Deku would be refining his training with Bruce and All Might, as well as making small improvements to the suit. Melissa, who had begun to develop feelings for Deku after seeing how hard he worked and learning that he was quirkless like her, only made those feelings stronger. The day would come when Deku would get the letter. However, Powers wanted him to open it in his office, and Deku did, and it would show All Might telling him that he was accepted and would be in Class 1A, and that this was his Hero Academia. "Quite the cheesy line, but good. It looks like you made it in," Powers would say. Deku would just shrug it off before asking what the next part of the plan was. Powers would sigh, saying that he's on a need-to-know basis, and right now he doesn't need to know, telling Deku to just be ready for tomorrow. Powers would call in Commander Todoroki as Deku left the building, saying, "Commander, I need you to take care of the officers that were on guard duty that night. After all, they're just street thugs, and make sure Grayson stays in America." Todoroki would smile, saying yes sir as his flames began to flare up. The next day, Powers would hold a meeting, saying in the past, the name Batman was one where people knew they would be safe, and criminals would be punished and had something to fear. However, Bruce Wayne became the very thing he swore to fight against, and the citizens had to pay the price. That is why I am here, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to introduce to you a new Batman. Please, don't be frightened. This Batman will be for you, the people. He's completely separate from the JTO and will be working closely with the Hero Association. His identity will be kept a secret for security reasons. Deku would be shocked as he'd never guessed Powers would openly reveal that there was a new Batman. The press conference would continue, and a week would pass with Deku training with Bruce and running missions for Powers. The first day of school would arrive, with Deku walking through the hall and easily finding the classroom. And he'd be the first one in the class, so he'd pick a seat all the way in the back where he could keep his eye on everyone. The rest of the class would pour in, with Deku recognizing 3 people in particular, those being Bakugo, Ida, and Uraraka. Ida would come up to Deku, apologizing to him, but telling him that his temper is unbecoming of a hero. Ochako would go up to him and thank him for saving her, as Deku would tell her not to worry about it too much. Strangely enough, Bakugo wouldn't say anything to Deku whatsoever, and this made Deku pretty suspicious. Aizawa would then wake up telling everyone to shut up and to get ready for a quirk evaluation. As Uraraka would ask about orientation, Deku would cut her off, saying it's up to the teachers on how they run their classes, and they're kinda short on time and under a lot of pressure from the Hero Association to produce heroes since the number of active heroes are in decline. Aizawa would say that Deku is correct, and for all of them to get a move on and meet on the practice field. Everyone would get changed and meet at the practice field. Aizawa would throw Deku the ball, saying he got the most points. This would surprise everyone who was wondering what his quirk was. Deku would throw the ball and get about 100 meters, and everyone kind of felt let down. "What'd you all expect from somebody who's quirkless?" Bakugo would say. This would surprise everyone, saying that how is someone who's quirkless supposed to be a pro hero? Aizawa would get pissed off, saying that anyone who gets below a hero rating will be expelled except for Deku, since they want to run their mouths so much. This would put everyone on edge, as now they've got potential consequences for their actions. The rest of the tests would go well, with Deku placing first in some of them, and there were 2 people to be expelled from the class. that being Mineta and Invisible Girl. The rest of the class would be dismissed for the day. As Deku would be about to leave, Melissa would run up to him asking if he wanted to go with her to the Club 54. Deku would smile, saying, "Sure, I don't have anything else going on today until tonight." The two went to the club, where Deku and Melissa would have a pretty great night together, until they saw somebody that was in Deku's class. It was the boy with red hair, handing some shady guy a credit chip for a bag of slappers. Slappers, I can't believe they're still being sold since the JTO has readily cracked down on drug deals lately. Melissa would say, "I've heard about them, but they're still pretty new. From what I heard, it gives you a boost, however the side effects are pretty nasty." Deku would say. Melissa would tell Deku that date night is over, time for him to go to work. Deku would sigh before leaving the club with Melissa as they'd go down the block to get into a van that held Deku's suit as he'd suit up and take off, tracking the dealer to a JTO base. "Something's up here. I'm gonna see what I can learn," Deku would say while turning invisible and gliding over to the window where he'd put his fingers on the glass, allowing himself to hear everything that was going on inside. He'd hear something about Project Nightfall before seeing someone with a black mask that had someone else beside him. A man that was wearing a hand on his face with all other hands all over his body. Talk about having a hand fetish, right? Deku would remark before attempting to enter the building. However, was stopped when he heard Melissa tell him that he should pull back for now and regroup with All Might and the others, saying that if that's who she thinks it is, then he'd be walking into a death sentence. Deku would tell her not to worry so much, that he's just gonna go have a look around. Deku would enter through the vent system and start taking a look around. However, he'd bump into a guard that would spill his coffee on Deku, shorting out the cloaking system, as every JTO guard would be on high alert. "You're an idiot, Midoriya. I told you this would happen. Get out of there now," Melissa would say. "Yelling in my ear really isn't helping things at a time like this," Deku would reply while fighting off JTO officers, punching some out while throwing batarangs and at others, even using his grapple wire to tie some up and pull them into others. Seeing an opening, Deku would escape from the building. After hearing about what happened, All Might would be furious, telling Deku that he should have listened to Melissa and pulled back, as he could have just given away all of them. Bruce, however, would tell them to calm down, as the kid was able to get some valuable information, plus has the excuse about them being connected to drug dealing, so Powers won't have any excuse to look into things any further. They all agree to be more careful, especially with Bruce telling Deku that he's going to have extra training from now on to make up for this. A few days would pass as the Heroes vs. Villain event would arrive, where the class would be waiting as All Might burst through the door and would explain the test, having them all change into their hero costumes. However, everyone would be shocked to find out that Deku was Batman. Ida would suddenly feel tight in his chest as he remembers everything he said to Deku. Bakugo, however, wouldn't be too surprised. All Might would announce that one match would have a handicap. "Batman will be facing a 3-on-1 fight. His opponents will be Kirishima, Bakugo, and Ida," All Might declared with a huge smile on his face. "Kid, can you hear me?" Bruce would ask over his comms in Deku's mask. "Mr. Wayne, what are you doing? Powers can hear everything that goes in my suit," Deku would say. "No, he can't. Not after Melissa and I taught the suit to ignore him," Bruce would say. Deku would be getting ready as he looked over, seeing Bakugo smile while entering the building. "You're gonna need to be careful of that one. He's probably well trained and it's clear that he's targeting you," Bruce would say. Deku would just nod as he would enter the building, as everyone would be watching from the monitor room, waiting to see what Batman could do. Deku would run through the halls until Kirishima would jump out at him. However, Deku would easily dismantle Kirishima, beating him down and throwing him into a wall. Kirishima would be desperate, seeing that the dust was blocking the cameras. He'd use 3 slappers, which would cause his muscles to increase, as Kirishima would also become a little taller. Deku would notice this as he'd throw 3 batarangs at Kirishima, which would cause a concussive blast, stunning him, while Deku would run up, kicking Kirishima in the face, which would do very little. Kirishima would grab Deku and end up throwing him through a wall. "What the hell are in those things? They've turned him into a one-man army," Deku would say. Bruce would tell him that slappers are a more effective version of venom, which is what Bane used to break his back. Deku would be slightly worried by this news, however, he'd grit his teeth before running at Kirishima, grabbing him, and would use a device to electrocute him, knocking him out.
I'm impressed you thought on your feet and overcame a huge obstacle. What else can you show me?
Bruce would say, smiling. Deku would then turn his suit invisible before running towards the stairs where he'd find it easy to go to the room where the warhead was. Instead of going straight for the warhead, Deku would see Bakugo in the corner, what he thinks is him talking to someone.
Old man, I think he's got someone in his ear, Deku would say. Then let's find out who it is,
Bruce would say as Deku would use his device to pick up on the audio. Listening in, he'd hear Powers talking to Bakugo.
Remember, your job is to find out if Batman has gone rogue or not. He's disturbing many of our operations, and that stunt he pulled a few nights ago was the last straw. Take him down, but I want him alive,
Powers would tell Bakugo. Bakugo would turn to Ida, asking what happened to Kirishima, and Ida replied that he was probably taken out by the bat. Before Ida could even finish, he'd be tied up and Deku would uncloak himself, telling Bakugo that if he wants him, he's right here. Bakugo would jump at Deku, however, Deku would uppercut Bakugo with his wings, causing him to be sent flying backwards. Deku would then begin to systematically take down Bakugo by damn near breaking some of his bones and beating him bloody until Bakugo landed an explosion on Deku. Saying that he knows his movements now, Bakugo would begin to fight back and overwhelm Deku. As Bruce would be watching this, he'd recognize some of the moves as the ones used by Azrael. Bruce would be shaken to his core, remembering how close Azrael came to killing him and taking over Gotham. However, Bruce had years to think back on his fight with Azrael and knew how to win.
Go for the back of his knee, then slam his head onto your knee. It'll stun him temporarily,
Bruce would radio to Deku, who would do just that, following up by throwing Bakugo down the stairs, buying himself some time.
You need to end this fast. He's only gonna come at you harder from now on. I ran a diagnostics on his suit. It's full of JZO technology, and his gauntlets are his most dangerous weapons he has, especially in this enclosed space. When you see him, take him down,
Bruce would say. Deku would agree, feeling that he was out of breath. All Might would signal that they have 5 minutes left. Deku would use this to his advantage. He'd throw down a smoke bomb and would cloak himself as he'd run around trying to find Bakugo until he hit him in the back with an explosion.
You know that suit is great for hiding you from cameras and people's visions, but it doesn't hide your heat signature,
Bakugo would say, grinning, pointing his gauntlet right at Deku. However, before he could use it, Deku would kick him rolling out of the way, throwing a Batarang that would cut off the handle of the pin on Bakugo's gauntlet. Deku would then start to get under Bakugo's skin, while finally using the shadows to his advantage.
What's wrong? Is the quirkless pest too much for you? I thought you were better than me, since you always used to boast about it to everyone. And now look at you, getting your ass kicked by the quirkless kid. What's wrong? Can't go cry to mommy and get me wrongfully locked up again? I was supposed to only serve 3 months. She gave me 2 years, without the possibility of parole, all while her son was breaking the law every day. I can't imagine being such a hypocrite,
Deku would tell Bakugo. This would cause him to lose it as he'd grab the other pin and pull it, releasing a huge explosion. Deku would barely dodge it and throw a Batarang that would hit the gauntlet, causing it to explode, destroying it, and sending an explosion that would consume Bakugo, and the entire building would blow up, with Deku soaring into the air, holding Kirishima and Ida. Once Deku got them to safety, he'd run back in, finding and saving Bakugo from further injuries. All Might would call for an immediate assistance in getting Bakugo and Kirishima to the hospital. Deku's suit would be tattered, however he'd walk over to Aizawa, who was there, handing him a chip from the suit, and Aizawa would take it and tell Deku to go to the cave. The rest of the students would be wondering where Deku is going, especially Ida, who didn't get to thank Deku for saving him, and for going easy on him. Ida would feel like he was useless, and All Might would know that he had to have to face the consequences for breaking the rules and setting up an illegal match. Deku would get to the cave and take off his mask, while Bruce bandaging him up, and shortly Melissa would run in checking up on Deku, asking if he was okay. Seeing the state of the Beyond suit, saying it's going to take her a while to fix it. Bruce would tell her that it needed some upgrades anyway. The three of them can work on it while Deku rests. 3 of you? I only count 2. Deku would say, confused. You really must have taken a beating if you didn't hear me come in. David would say while introducing himself. Deku would smile while he laid down and got some much needed rest. Later that night, All Might would be out at a bar with his best friend Namasa as they'd talk about their personal lives and work, which would eventually lead them to talking about Deku. How's my son doing, All Might? Namasa would ask, and All Might would look shocked, not really saying anything. He probably doesn't think I know his secret, but I do. I've known everything about him since the day I married his mom. I've fought to keep him safe and get justice for him when the judge gave him an unfair sentence. So I'll ask again, how's my son, Toshinori? Namasa would say. All Might would take a swig of his beer and tell Namasa everything. Namasa would be a little pissed off about Bakugo being part of the JTO and being an undercover agent. You know, they promoted me to commissioner today. So, as the new police commissioner, I'll tell you this, All Might. You're gonna involve us in this plan of yours, or I'll take you and everyone else at UA in. You're dealing with my son, and I won't be sitting on the sidelines on this. Namasa would say, warning All Might. And that's where I'm going to be leaving this one off. I hope you guys enjoy, and next week we'll be tuning in for part 3, hopefully. Anyways, you guys have a blessed rest of your day. Remember, God's awesome, you guys are too, and peace.